Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I thought I would take a look back and reflect at all of the books that I read over last year. 2022 was a tumultuous one for me for a number of reasons. So I'll admit that I didn't read as much as I would have hoped, but I still have 34 books here that I really enjoyed. Um, and we'll just sort of see where they all play on this league table. I'm also a bit under the weather right now, so if I sound a bit croaky or look a bit out of it, it's just my sinuses. I'm very blocked up right now. Um, so I would say the I've made 5 tiers for this ranking. We've got Not For Me, which is the ones that just I don't think, because I don't think any of these books are bad, but some of them I think they weren't what I thought they would be. I went into them with expectations that were completely dashed the moment I was like 50 pages in, and then I finished them but still, didn't really enjoy the experience. All Right are the books that I I wouldn't read again, but I'm not disappointed. I'm not regretful that I did read them. Great. These are probably like middle of the way, the sort of average. Thoroughly enjoyed. These are the ones that really sort of spoke to me, and I had a lot of fun with. Was probably lecturing about to friends and family for weeks. Blew my mind. I mean, those are the ones that started the obsession. So like those are the ones that I read it and couldn't read anything else for days afterwards. I was still processing all of my thoughts and feelings about it because it was just so transformative. I was like, oh, you know the ones. So I'm thinking, because I haven't looked at any of these books since actually reading them, so this is all being improvised, by the way. Um, I'm thinking these 3 tiers in the middle are probably going to have quite a few books on them, and then Blew My Mind and Not For Me, maybe only a few. But yeah, let's get into it. First up, and this isn't in chronological order, by the way, I've completely randomized the books that I read last year. So first up, The Nickel Boys. So The Nickel Boys, context, by the way, I got this book when I was in Massachusetts. So I did summer camp this year. And on one of my days off from being a camp counselor, I went to a bookshop and they had like a signed first edition of this book. And I'd heard of the writer before because I think he's won multiple Pulitzer Prizes and has also got like a MacArthur Genius Grant or something. Like he's a big deal. So I was like, oh, okay, like it's about race and segregation during the 20th century. Like this could be interesting. So I picked it up. Sorry, don't know why I'm speaking so quickly. Picked it up, and yeah, I really liked it. It was sort of like a activist version of sort of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where it was all about like entrapment and the sort of way that white people could assert control over people of color, especially during the 60s. Because the main character as well, he has everything going for him until one day he's in the wrong place, the wrong time, and then is put in this sort of young offenders institution where some people don't even make it out alive. Like if you break the rules, I think they take you to, did they call it the ice cream factory? It was something like that, where like they beat you like mercilessly. And this is sort of documenting, and it's a real life story as well. This was an actual institution. So I did. Wow, it feels weird saying I enjoyed reading it because it's such a harrowing story, but it was really good. I'm gonna say great. I almost put it in thoroughly enjoyed, but at the same time we have a lot of great books to get through, so I'm not sure how it will hold up against the others. This is subject to change, by the way. I can move them in between. Next up, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Um, I read quite a bit of sci-fi last year. This was my introduction to Arthur C. Clarke. I don't know if this was the one I should have started with, because in my mind I was like, oh, I'll go for the most iconic one because of the Stanley Kubrick film, which made so much money and is seen as like a masterpiece. I was like, oh, I'll do that one. I don't know if that's perhaps Arthur C. Clarke's like best one to start with. It was good. I thought that they could have spent more time on the spaceship with the AI, because there's like the spaceship is operated by a system that's sort of haywires and then like tries to kill them all. And I thought, oh, like you're gonna be on a spaceship with this evil AI the whole book. And no, that isn't the case. The book really spirals at the end. There's like so much craziness with like a star baby, and he like ascends beyond space and time. It was really wacky. But I did enjoy it. I think all right. It was all right. Salem's Lot. Oh boy. Now this newer like people that come to my channel will know now that I am on like a Stephen King tirade. I want to read all of his books. This was my introduction to Stephen King. And I really had a great time. It's weird because if you'd asked me what I thought about it right after I'd read it, I'd probably put it in thoroughly enjoyed, because I did. But now that I'm sort of comparing it in my mind to the other Stephen King books that I've read, I think it's more sort of middle of the way. It's a tough one. It's so epic as well. Like it's one of the larger books in this selection, and I did really enjoy it. Oh, police. I think why I enjoyed it so much is because it's got a lot of very striking visuals. Like vampires are very scary to imagine, especially when you're sort of reading this up against like a big window, and you've got the mental image of like little Ralphie Glick tapping on the glass, like begging for you to let him in. Like it's eerie. I'm gonna put it at the top of great. I do really like it. It's just, I think in the greater body of Stephen King's work, it's good, but it's not like a standout. Oh, Testaments. Oh boy. I loved this book. I loved it so much. In fact, controversial statement, I think this book is as good as the original Handmaid's Tale. Because, hear me out, as much as I love The Handmaid's Tale, the whole time you're reading it, because the world building is so good, Margaret Atwood like is a pro at it, you're thinking, well, I want to know the origin story to this. Like, how did this all come to be? What is it like from the perspective of the people who are actually running this institution? And that's exactly what Testaments gives you. You get to see the sort of POV from the aunt's point of view. Like, you actually see how it all broke down as well. Like, I think what's great about these books as well is the way that Margaret Atwood deals with history, because it's like a fictional retelling. It's not so much a dystopia, because dystopia is normally very sci-fi, it's very out there, but all of the things that happen in The Handmaid's Tale and in the Testaments are all things that have already happened in human history. And so the way she sort of plays with that idea, and the idea that society is always like a transient thing, you know, like the current Republic of Gilead will come to pass, and then in like the epilogue, when it's like hundreds of years later and they're looking back on what Gilead was, and the nature of sources and their reliability, I don't know, is it a blew my mind this early on? Is it a blew my mind? No, I will put in thoroughly enjoyed. Feels too early. Thoroughly enjoyed. Okay, next up, Penultimate Truth. Much like Arthur C. Clarke, this was my introduction to Philip K. Dick. Again, I don't know if this was the best one of his to start with. I did think it was really good, but at the same time, I want to see more from him, so I'm going to probably read a few more of his this year. But I did thoroughly enjoy it. It did feel like it was borrowing heavily from H.G. Wells, because the idea that there was like a whole society of people, like the human race is like living underground, and they've been told that there's a war that's being waged on the surface, and then when they go to the surface happenstantially they discover that they were lied to. It feels very The Time Machine, where the rich sort of keep the poor underground to sort of reinforce the caste system. So while I enjoyed the book, the whole time I was sort of thinking, well, it's not the most creative concept. Like, it's very H.G. Wells. So I'd probably put it... great. Day of the Triffids. Again, on the theme of sci-fi, this was my introduction to John Wyndham. And I think this was the perfect place to start with him, because this is probably his most iconic story, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. It is a bit wacky, because like it's plants, and you don't think of plants, unless you're like a regular Plants vs. Zombies player, you don't think of weaponizing plants and the idea that a plant could hurt you. So it is a very big leap for your imagination to picture these sort of triffids with their needles sort of flicking about. And I haven't watched the movie version because I know it's terrible. I did watch the TV show though for Midwich Cuckoos, which is also based on a John Wyndham book, and that was really good. But yeah, I really liked it. I don't know if I quite liked it as much as... excuse me. I think I quite liked it as much as Salem's Lot. But it's in there. I think... yeah, that's a good place for it. Okay. What's next? Rosemary's Baby. Oh my goodness. Again... I feel like I'm going to be saying this all video. This is my introduction to Ira Levin, and I think this was a great place to start with Ira Levin. And this book, holy cow, what I love so much about it is the way that it's sort of played on misogyny and the sort of old-fashioned beliefs around women. Because the whole time, Rosemary, no one will believe her. Like, her husband's in on it, the sort of plot to give her baby to the devil, but it's also terrifying because she's a hysterical woman, or at least that's how she's perceived, so nobody takes her seriously, and she can't really escape because it gets to a point where she's so like monstrously pregnant, she's got this giant bulge, like where's she gonna go? She's physically incapacitated. And the ending as well, the ending is so fun when she is so horrified that her baby has become the devil, but then she sort of just has a moment. It's like, you know what? Yeah, he's still my baby. I'm going to be the mother of Satan. And she just puts all of the other Satan worshippers in their place. She's like, look, came out of my vagina. I'm the mother of Satan. Move aside. Is it blew my mind? Is it? Thoroughly enjoyed. We're getting closer. We are getting closer. I would put it at the top of thoroughly enjoyed. Oh, and I think we're here. Valley of the Dolls. This book is the blueprint for sort of films about success, you know, because we have so many films like that where it's like a cautionary tale and like, oh, be careful what you wish for, you know, you want to be a big Hollywood star, well, you know, it's gonna be... This book really sort of symbolizes the destructive power of fame. Like, especially in this time where everyone wants, we're so capitalistic, everybody wants to sort of I feel like I'm just rambling. But you know what I mean? Like, the West especially is so individualistic. Everybody sort of bases self-worth seemingly on success and like fame and money, and this book is sort of there to tell you, like, you know what, money doesn't buy happiness. Sometimes when these big celebrities have developed all this fame, they realize the grass isn't greener. The thing that's most precious to them then is some privacy. And I just love the way this book deals with it. The way that it sort of dismantles these old-fashioned ideas about women. Yeah, blew my mind. I'm sorry. Blew my mind. Valued the dolls. And I still haven't watched the movie, which I'm going to have to at some point, because that book, I'd reread that any day of the week. Maybe I should read more Jacqueline Suzanne. Don't know. Death on the Nile. So I read this because the 2022 movie adaptation came out, which isn't as good, by the way, as the, I want to say, 1978 movie adaptation. I think my problem with this book is good, and Hercule Poirot is like a great detective, and it's fun to watch him and read about him. But it's very predictable. For me, this story doesn't have a sort of ace up its sleeve. Like, it doesn't have like a big twist that I think I really enjoy with Agatha Christie works. Like, the moment I read the book, and you know that like Lynette Ridgway basically steals Simon Doyle from Jacqueline de Belfort, it's like, oh well, she's obviously going to be the killer. And I think you're meant to be shocked that he's also in on it, but it's like, no, I can see, like, you can easily put it together. I don't think it's as far-fetched and out there as some of her other works. So I'm going to say, I do feel like I'm being harsh, though. No, it's alright. It's alright. Okay. Oh boy, we're here. So this 2022 also commemorated the 30-year anniversary of The Secret History, Donna Tartt's book that sort of like solidified her as like an iconic modern writer, and basically the book that started the dark academia subgenre in books, which is something that is very like popular right now. Oh, I love it. Oh, it's so good. And it felt very real to me as well, because I'm someone who's had like a very sheltered upbringing and has spent most of my life in a sort of like highbrow academic environment. So seeing these sort of uptight, exclusive students who then can't make it in the real world and like fall to pieces when they commit a murder, it really sort of spoke to me, especially because I studied Latin from like the age of like 11 to 18. So seeing them in their ancient Greek class, the way that they're ostracized from the rest of the school, it's sort of like the exclusive community within the exclusive community. And that, again, really sort of, I related to it a lot, because that was exactly how we were treated when we studied Latin. It was like, oh, why you study a dead language? Oh, I love this book. It's really... is it a blew my mind? I just love what it has to say about at the elite, and how you think that it's a privilege to go to these distinguished schools, but really it's a handicap. Oh, is it a blew my mind? Yeah, who am I kidding? It's a blew my mind. Go read The Secret History, people. It's the best. Read The Secret History. Okay, what's next? Oh no, people are going to hate me for this. The Bloody Chamber. I didn't love it. I did I think the bar was raised so high because I heard so many good things from so many different people. And when I found out that it was like a sort of feminist retelling of classic fairy tales, I was like, oh, that's such a cool concept. I can't wait to see what it's like. And for me, it just didn't go as far as I would have thought it should have. Like, it could have been so much more irreverent, so much more subversive. A lot of the stories, sure, they were retellings, but I was bored. I found myself, like, the Bloody Chamber, for instance, it felt like the only major distinction from the original fairy tale was that instead of her being rescued by a man who she'd then go on to marry, she's rescued by her mum. Which, sure, it's like, oh, woman saves woman. That is more progressive than the sort of male saviour that she then has to remarry. But I was still like, come on, it's Bluebeard. We could be so much more raw with this. Like, what if she kills him? Like, I don't know. It could have gone in a more radical direction for me. And I think I'm never going to agree with people who really celebrate it, so I think it's a not for me. Sorry. Next up, The Promise, which was the winner of the Booker Prize 2021. This book, context by the way, so if you live in the UK and you go into a Waterstones, a lot of books lately, they do this thing, and it drives me so angry, it drives me wild. They have these books where the cover, the right edge of the cover, the bit that you turn over, doesn't take up the whole page. They now do like 2-page covers where it has like a dip in it. I'm not explaining it very well, but if you've seen them in the bookshop, you know what I mean. This book had one of those covers where you sort of open it, but then there's more of the cover underneath it, and I hate it. I don't think it looks good. And so this book, I was like, oh, I want to read it, but I'm not going to read it until I find a version that doesn't do that. And I remember I was in Reykjavik and I was in their duty-free section. I saw that they had a version of the book without a cover like that. I was like, oh, thank you, Iceland. Thank you. The Icelandic people, they get it. They said, we think this cover's ugly too. And so they had a different style of cover through however many kroner it cost for that book, because I was like, I want this one. And yeah, I finally got to read it. I noticed I haven't talked about the book yet. I did really enjoy it. I thought it was like a fun sort of black comedy style jab at apartheid, because it's this like housekeeper who the owner of the house sort of says in their will that she can inherit the whole house, but the white descendants in the family, they sort of begrudge the housekeeper anything because she's like a downtrodden black working class woman. And then she doesn't curse them, she takes it all on the chin, but there's like a string of tragedies that kills every single member of the immediate family until that house is finally in her hands. And that's why it's called The Promise, because like the original owner of that estate promised it to the housekeeper. And it is very satisfying yet macabre to see like the horrible things that happen to this family. Like, one of them kills themselves, one of them is killed in like a hit and run. Like, it's very dark, but at the same time it's also empowering, because it's like, yeah, the housekeeper should have had the property. So I can see why it won the Booker Prize. I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed last year's winner, just because Shuggie Bain was like so... I mean, if you haven't read Shuggy Bane, read Shuggy Bane. That book was intense. But I do still enjoy this book. In fact, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, up there. Next up, On the Road. Okay, another sidebar. I don't like the Beat Generation. Lynch me, hate me, say horrible things in the comments, do whatever. I don't like the Beat Generation. I don't get it. I don't see the appeal. I'm not a fan of Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, any of them. Having said that, I can appreciate that On the Road is a classic. Like it's a good book, but the whole time I'm reading it, I'm frustrated because I'm like, Sal, why are you still hanging around with Dean Moriarty? It's like, he's a dick. Can you please leave him? Like, he's not a nice guy. And like, they go all around America together, just drifting. And I appreciate like the sentiment there. Like, yeah, I'm anti-establishment too. Why do you have to like chain yourself to the workforce? If you want to be a drifter, be a drifter. But Dean Moriarty is so toxic, and it's just annoying that Sal stays by him for so long. Is it an alright? No, I feel like it's better than that. Okay, I'll put it at the bottom of great. Because it is a classic. Like, I can see why they would teach about it in schools, but it had its moments. On to the next one. We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. It was alright. I think I probably should have started with The Haunting of Hill House, because this was my introduction to Shirley Jackson as well. And I think I really appreciated the semi-autobiographical details in it. Knowing that Shirley Jackson, in her last years, dealt with agoraphobia, you get a sense of that while reading the book. Like, it's very isolationist. It's very, this house is ours to protect. We can't let anyone in. You know, the two sisters very much emulate that. I think my biggest issue was that it never scared me. It's like a horror book, and Shirley Jackson is so celebrated as like a horror writer, but there was never a moment where I was like chilled, because conceptually I just don't think it's a very scary book. I don't know, like, I suppose it's meant to be that sort of invasion of privacy idea, that like someone is trying to get into their house, but still I'm not too big on it. It was fine. It was alright. Next up, Metamorphosis, Franz Kafka. This one I'm torn, because it's an anthology, so do I judge it for all the short stories in that anthology, or do I just judge it for Metamorphosis? Because if I'm just judging it for Metamorphosis, then it's up here in the thoroughly enjoyed. If I'm judging it on the whole anthology, it's down here in the alright. Because Metamorphosis itself is incredible. Like, Gregor Samsa waking up one day to be a beetle. It's so newfangled, so alternative, and yet so true to like real life trauma that I do really love it. But then there are other stories in this anthology as well that are like watching paint dry. Like, there's a short story in here about the Great Wall of China that is so painfully dull. I honestly don't know how I finished it. It's not all bad besides Metamorphosis. Like, there's another one called In the Penal Colony, which I thought was quite good. Do I judge it on all of it? Oh, this is hard. Okay. No, I think I'm gonna judge it on all of it because I judged the Bloody Chamber on all of its stories, which I didn't appreciate. So I think I'm also going to judge this on all of its stories. In which case, I'd probably put it at the top of all right. Yeah, I think that's a good place for it. This is so hard. I feel like I'm alienating people every time I talk about these books because some of these books are so celebrated. And I'm not saying they're bad, it's just like they didn't speak to me as much. Sorry. Next up, another Agatha Christie, and then there were none. This I liked more than Death on the Nile because for me this was more creative, and it was more. There was like a palpable sense of action, like and thrilling. Like I think I read it in less than a day because I was sort of on the edge of my seat. Like, oh, this is like it's got me in a chokehold. I want to know who's committing these murders. And the concept of having a murder mystery where everybody dies, that's really interesting because it's like, well, how does that work? So, thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to put it at the bottom of thoroughly enjoyed because I do think it's not got the same density of sort of brilliance as some of the better ones. Like, it's a very sort of fast-paced, like, popcorn book. But I did still really enjoy it. Fiesta. Oh no, I'm going to upset more people. I'm not a very big Hemingway fan. I said it. His style of writing is very less is more. It's very, I'm going to give you this simple narrative, but underneath all of that, if you read between the lines, there's this very big subtext about the lost generation. And I'm like, sure, lovely, teach it in schools. But for me, I didn't enjoy it. It's alright, but I think it's at the bottom of alright. Oh god. Please don't kill me, people on the internet. Oh, this book though, The Vegetarian. Oof. So this book is one of the International Booker Prize winners. It's by a Korean writer. And oh my, it's so alternative, but like in the best way. Because from the offset, you think like, oh, it's just going to be about this woman who's become a vegetarian, much to her husband's like chagrin. It'll just be the marital tensions there. Oh no, the book is bananas. There's so many weird things in this book. Like, she has an affair with like, I think her brother-in-law, where they're like painting each other with flowers, and that they have like this metaphorical sex where like she's like a flower being pollinated, and it's so insane. Oh, this book. Oh, I love it. I love how bizarre it is. I want more books like this. And I like the alternative fiction where you can't really make it out, like it's so insane. I like that that's becoming more mainstream. So I think this book is great. Wearing great. Yeah. I think I'm gonna put it here. As much as I like it, similar to And Then There Were None, it's not the longest book. I think compared to some of these others, which feel more like a labour of love, I think the other ones win out. But it's still very good. Like, don't be fooled by me putting it in great. It's a great one. Don't be fooled by me putting it in great. It's a great one. Honestly, I don't know what's coming out of my mouth at this point. Next up, the hearing trumpet. Mm, what I didn't know, which I found interesting, is that Lenora Carrington, the person who wrote this, was married to Max Ernest, the surrealist painter. They like ran off together. It's like, oh, that's fascinating. Because I love surrealist art. But besides that, the book, it's very weird. I like that the main character is like an elderly woman in her 90s because it's sort of dismantling the sort of old fashioned approach to fiction where our main characters are always very young and attractive because they're people like that we would typically root for. So having it be an elderly woman at a retirement home, I was like, oh, that's like a nice sort of subversive way of starting a narrative. There are moments where it gets wacky, but not in the way that I like. Like, The Vegetarian really walked the line of it being silly, but it was still a serious novel between those moments. The Hearing Trumpet, there were parts, much like 2001 A Space Odyssey, where it really spiraled, and I was like, well, what are we doing? What's going on here? Like, this is crazy. So I'd probably put it... I'm putting it at the bottom of alright. I get that part of its appeal is it's sort of like an Edward Lear nonsense style narrative where everything is meant to be not taken seriously. But at the same time, I feel like that's not an excuse to sort of cheapen your storytelling. The Death of Grass. This one I liked, but I do feel that it didn't have much of its own identity, if that makes sense. Like, it had a lot to say about British exceptionalism, which I appreciated, but I think Lord of the Flies says it better. And it had a lot to say about biological warfare and the threats that come from nature. And I was like, oh, okay, I like that, but I think Day of the Triffids says it better. And it also had a lot to say about travelling in times of the apocalypse and how you have to constantly be on your guard. But again, I think On the Road tells it better. This book has a lot of great ideas, but I don't think you'd ever pick it up versus those other three books that each sort of do it better. It's all right. I think about midway through all right. Like, it's good, but it could have been more interesting. Oh, this one, Cannery Row. All right. I love Steinbeck. I think Steinbeck is a talent. Like, Of Mice and Men, amazing. Like, Grapes of Wrath, hell yeah. This, however, I get what he was trying to do. It's like a documentarian's sort of look at a street. It's very sort of let's take a look at still life. It's like, oh, everyone on this single Cannery Row. It's like a microcosm of society. Yes, but for me, I've read other books that have done it better. Like, I'm going to butcher his name, but Naguib Mahfouz, he's an Egyptian writer. He won the Nobel Prize. He has a book called Midak Ali, which I love, and that does such a better job of telling the narrative of like a street and how all the people are interconnected. This, for me, it's a very short book, and so it doesn't have a lot of time to grab you, but it's a bit too casual and it's a bit too irreverent. Like, there are moments where I wanted it to be more serious because this is real life. And so for me, I think it's a not for me. Yeah, not for me. Oh, but Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. That's for me. Oh, this book. First of all, the story of how this book was came to being is really interesting because Jean Rhys was a writer who didn't achieve any major success in her lifetime. It wasn't until she was like an elderly woman that she published this book. And so that's in a way that's really sad because she didn't like live to see the meteoric success that this book would have, and how because of this book people would then look at the other stuff that she wrote and come to realize that actually she's a very talented writer. But this book especially it's so unique. Like, I can't think, she was really like the first of her kind to do something like this, because it's a story based on another classic story that is considered sacred. Like, people love the Bronte sisters and love Jane Eyre, but the whole time you're reading Jane Eyre, you're thinking like, well, what about that crazy woman in the attic? What about Rochester's wife? She never really gets her side of the story heard, and so this is like a really cool origin story. It's reclamation. It's like, stop putting these women up in the attic and calling them crazy. She's actually a victim of colonialism and an abusive husband, and it's so interesting. I think I do really love it. I think it's in the middle of thoroughly enjoyed. Read Wide Sargasso Sea. I mean, read Jane Eyre first, then read Wide Sargasso Sea. It's pwah. This Side of Paradise by Fitzgerald. I much prefer Fitzgerald to Hemingway, which is hard because he wasn't a very nice person. He's an amazing writer, but he was an alcoholic and a woman beater. This was his first book that he wrote in his 20s, I think. And you see the potential in him even from such an early age. Like, this book, the narrative itself is chaos. Like, it's a really cluttered mess of a book, but he has such a flair for writing that you don't really mind. You're sort of reading it like, oh wow. But it has so much to say as well about youth, especially at this time in the world, the sort of battle of the lost generation. And it's done in a way that for me is more compelling than how Hemingway does it. And so I'd probably put it... I'd put it about here. It is great, but it can be difficult to read in places because there's a lot of sort of him just ham-fisting lots of ideas into one book. What's next? Flatland. Oh, Flatland. This book, it's so much like how I was talking about Wide Sargasso Sea. It's so experimental. Like, you're reading it and you're thinking like, I don't think I've read anything like this. And I like that because there's so many books now. Like, the industry is so oversaturated. Everyone's a writer. So to have this book that's a science fiction dystopia, but it's also like a lesson in maths and geometry, and how the rules of numbers have been used to the advantage of like a totalitarian state. Like, oh my god. Blew my mind. I remember reading Flatland and just being like, how had no one thought of a book like this until he wrote it? Like, it's so cool. Like, the main character is a square, and then there's like a caste system where the more vertices you have, the more superior you are. And then him trying to explain his perception to the third dimension, while the third dimension is explaining it to the second dimension. And then also like the inbuilt sexism, the idea that like the women are like straight lines with like a point. It's like, oh, read Flatland. Crazy book, amazing book. Passing. Um so I love the Harlem Renaissance. I think it doesn't get enough praise because it's the first time in the world that African Americans, well, black people in general, were being given the freedom to express their inner creativity, their inner dialogue. They were finally able to like tell their side of the story, because this was after like the Great Migration to the North, like after the Emancipation Proclamation. This was black people finally taking control of their own narrative, and so books like this don't get enough praise. Having said that, I thought it was too short. I was just getting into it and then it ended. And I think more could have been done with the concept, because Passing, it's about black people whose skin was so fair that they could pass for white. And then it's that sort of moral quandary of, do you forsake your friends and your family for a life of security? You know, you won't be treated any differently to the white people, but then you would have also alienated yourself from the rest of the black community. And so I do really enjoy this book. But I think the Harlem Renaissance has more to offer. I'm going to say... it's alright. It's near the top of alright. Black No More. Now this is a tale. Black No More is also a Harlem Renaissance book, but it does more with the concept, and I really appreciate it. So it's this tale of a machine that can turn black people into white people, which is crazy, isn't it? Like, what a bizarre idea for a book. But because all of these black people are tired of being treated differently because of racism, they all come in droves to be turned into white people. And I think the book does an amazing job of sort of satirizing how ridiculous racism is. Because it gets to a point in the book where, because everybody's white, they need a new differential. And so a bunch of the original white people start tanning themselves until they're like darker and darker. And then it becomes the new thing. Suddenly being dark is like the superior quality and being light-skinned isn't. And it's such a funny way of sort of pulling apart like racial injustice and being like, this is ridiculous, this makes no sense. So I'm going to say... it is great. I'm thinking... I'm putting it in the middle of great. It was like a really cool story. And I do want to read more from the Harlem Renaissance because of it. Oh, Jesus, The Power. So The Power by Naomi Alderman. This is a story. It's a bit like Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses series, which sort of takes racial tensions and like flips it on its head so that like black people are the dominant race. But in this, it's flipping sexism. So like women, they develop the power to electrocute men, and that sort of overnight turns them into like the rulers of the world. The men sort of become like servile because they don't want to be killed. And it's so gritty and so dark. Like it's rare that you're reading a book, and like because I am a male, I was very uncomfortable. Like, there's so many scenes, and that's what I like. I like that this book, it sort of gives men something to answer for. Like, you're reading it and feeling like, oh no, like all of these horrible things these women are doing to men, it's exactly what happens in the real world, but the other way around. Because, like, they're tearing men limb from limb, they're raping them. Oh, it's horrible. This book is really good. I'm thinking thoroughly enjoyed, about there. It's definitely a recommendation. Like, it's such a bleak view, but not an unrealistic view of the complex relationships between men and women, and how men abuse their positions of power, and so once women get that power, it's very much a Black Mirror. What's next? Is this Crime and Punishment or Anna Karenina? This is Anna Karenina. Okay, so I enjoyed Anna Karenina. It's an epic story. I do think Tolstoy, similar to Dickens, has a very sugar-coated, rose-tinted look at the working classes. Like, there's a lot of scenes in Anna Karenina where Konstantin Levin, he's just sort of with the poor, admiring them. Like, oh, they work with so much spirit. They don't care for money. They just live in the moment. Oh, isn't it wonderful? And yes, that is commendable. But it's done in a way that feels inauthentic. Like, let's not forget that the working classes have to really struggle. Their lives are a constant challenge. There's disease, there's poverty, there's starvation, there's crime. Let's not act as if, life is just some big old jolly for them. I also think as well that while Anna Karenina is very groundbreaking for what it has to say about the role of women in relationships, because she sort of ends her marriage because she's not happy and then starts a relationship with Count Vronsky, there does get to a point where I get very tired with Anna's character, and I feel like you're very privileged, you're very entitled. Like, she has a lot of first world problems, excuse me, and I'm just a bit over her. And so when she does ultimately kill herself, it's awful, but in my mind I'm kind of like, well, I kind of prefer Levin's narrative anyway. Like, the moment Levin takes the reins as like the main character, I'm more engaged, because his whole inner turmoil about what is the meaning of life and the universe is such a more interesting story than what happens with Anna Karenina, which is weird because she is the hero of the story, and yet she's sort of sidelined. And I guess that's the point, because she's a woman. She's not allowed to sort of stand centre stage by herself. But it does also encumber the story, because I'm not really rooting for her. I am in the first half, and then in like the last 300 pages or so, I'm like, nah, you lost me, Anna. I'm much more invested in Levin and Kitty's relationship. So I did thoroughly enjoy it. It is a masterpiece. It has issues, but they're like my personal issues. It doesn't make it a bad book. I'm gonna say there. Next up, Night Shift. This is a really cool collection of short stories. A lot of people tote this as Stephen King's best anthology because it was his first ever short story compilation. It was sort of when like his writing was at its freshest and like his ideas were very sort of on it. Um, it's not across the board a great anthology. There are stories that I didn't really care for, but the way that it sets up Salem's Lot, the way it sets up The Stand, and the franchise of the Children of the Corn, which has also come from this anthology, like it's very impactful in the horror universe. So I think there. I'm gonna put it there. Next up, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I tell you, this was the first book that I read in 2022. I started it on New Year's Day, and I hated it. Oh boy, did I hate it. I've never been a fan of self-help books, but occasionally I'm like, oh, let me give it a go, see if, they've got any better. Especially as this one's like considered a modern classic. No, I'm sorry. This book, its advice is ridiculous. It's cover to cover of interviewing rich people and asking them what made them successful, and then just pulling all of that information and being like, oh, well, if you really wish for success, then it will come. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, not for me. Crime and Punishment. I'm going to tell you right now. Oh, sorry. I'm not going to tell you right now. I will now tell you, this is the GOAT. This is the greatest of all 2022. Crime and Punishment. Yes. Loved it so much. Thought it was amazing. I don't know if I've ever related so much to a character in Raskolnikov. Like, his struggle for existence, the way he sees everything as so meaningless, and like just trying to it's bleak, it's so horribly bleak, but that's why I loved it, because it wasn't pretending. Like Tolstoy, I don't know, just the way he depicts people, it just doesn't sit right with me. With Dostoevsky, everyone's terrible, everyone has a skeleton in their closet and some sort of vice that they feed into, and I love it. Like, this book is so true to real life, especially in this day and age. Like, yeah, society is very dehumanizing. The only way he can feel powerful is to go out and grab an axe and kill a couple people. Yeah, exactly. And the ending as well. I didn't expect it to be so optimistic. When he's in prison and Sonia keeps in touch with him and he learns that the key to living life happily is to live life through other people. Like, to know that him being there gives her life more purpose. Like, that's enough to keep him going. And that's just such a wonderful ending. Yeah, Crime and Punishment all the way. Love it. And it's crazy because when I read The Brothers Karamazov, I wasn't that big on it. And so I went into Crime and Punishment thinking, oh, I'm not sure about Dostoevsky. But no, I really enjoy it. And I think maybe I should give Brothers Karamazov another go. I mean, I read it when I was like 16, so it is possible that it went over my head. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. God. This one's tough. Because I liked it, but it's also not really a book that you can like because it's so harrowing. Like, it's the semi-autobiographical downward spiral of Sylvia Plath's depression into suicide. Like, it's very upsetting. Oh. I think the problem for me as well is that because it's so depressive, all of her arguments about the sort of human experience feel a bit hollow because she's only looking at it from the sort of pathological gaze of her illness. Like, there's so much more to life than what she makes it. I think, where am I going to put it? I think it is a Blew My Mind. I'm putting it at the bottom of Blew My Mind because I'm not happy with putting it up there. But it is a transformative piece of work. And it gives you probably the most intimate look there is into the psyche of someone who's having a mental breakdown. Next up, Clara and the Sun. I don't think I need to give Ishiguro an introduction. You know, Nobel Prize winner, Booker Prize winner. His books are everywhere. He's very much a modern legend. This book was also very... I think what I love about Ishiguro so much is that he doesn't really have a genre. Like, every one of his books feels like it could have been written by a different author, and yet they're all sort of tied together by that same commitment to the craft. Like, he never half does a story. And I really love that, because this book, if you told me he wrote this, I wouldn't have believed you, because it's very sort of alternative sci-fi, but also heartfelt human drama. Because Clara herself is like an android that is bought by a rich family for the little girl to look after. But then it gets super creepy because the little girl gets sick and the mother sort of speculates about having the android replace the little girl as like a coping mechanism for the family. And it's really intense. I'm going to say... I'm putting it there. It is really good. Read Clara and the Sun. And last, but certainly not least, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Sorry if I butchered the name. Much like the other works that I've talked about in this video by writers of colour, there's a sense of reclaiming the narrative, because I feel like colonial stories have typically followed Conrad's sort of Heart of Darkness blueprint, the idea that like, oh, these poor white people, you know, these natives are attacking them with spears, and it's like, no, you assholes are stealing their homeland, of course they're upset. And Things Fall Apart, the way that it sort of tells the story of Okonkwo and his like inner struggles within the African tribe, but then also the novelty of like seeing the white man for the first time and wondering if they can trust him, and the sort of insidious way that he spreads his religion and his influence within this Nigerian community. It is a really good book. I think I'm going to put it at the top of great. And yeah, that is my table. What do we think? Those are the 34 books I read in 2022. A very versatile bunch. Lots of different genres, cultures, writers' backgrounds, time periods. I'm hoping that my selection will be as eclectic in 2023. Yeah, not much else to say. What books did you read in 2022? Did you like any of these ones or hate me for my opinions? Who knows? But as always, toodaloo.